right or so. All right, perfect. Welcome everyone to our 11th Web Thrive webinar. This is a special topic and also a special one because it's kind of our anniversary. Our first webinar was June of last year. And this topic is how can businesses work to reduce their carbon footprint. And we have 3 panelists that all have experience in the field of sustainability and carbon emissions and all that jazz. So really great to have all of you. And why don't we start with some introductions? So go around and we'll start with maybe Angela on sharing what role you and your company plays in taking on climate change.
Sure, thanks very much. My name is Angela Nagy. I am the founder and CEO of Green Step Solutions based in Kelowna, British Columbia, Canada. And we started really to help save the world through business. And a huge part of that, and one of the reasons that I started the company was to tackle climate change. So we have a web-based carbon software platform that allows businesses to measure their carbon footprint based on the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And we also provide services to help support businesses that need a little bit more help along the way to doing that.
Awesome. Why don't we go around kind of in a circle-ish? So Steve, sorry.
Okay, thanks, Mario. Hi, everyone. My name is Steve Bowles. I'm the manager of sustainability services for a consulting firm called AET Group that's headquartered in Kitchener, Ontario, near kind of outside of Toronto. And how are we active in this role of taking on climate change? Well, it's kind of in both the services that we do, which includes greenhouse gas quantification, and doing strategic planning with organizations to help them figure out ways to reduce their risk or reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And also, we're very active in the verification of greenhouse gas emission reports also. So that's on the quality assurance side, making sure that the numbers that are being publicly stated out there are actually done properly and correct. But just as much, we're also very proud of the internal actions that we're doing at AET to reduce our own carbon footprint. We're a certified net zero building, net zero carbon building. We've converted to solar panels for our electricity generation, electric fleet, and many other initiatives that we're doing to kind of try to walk the talk as well. So we like to think that we provide the services, but also do it in-house as well. Thank you.
Awesome. And Jeff?
Yeah, I'm Jeff Golfman, founder and president of the Raw Office. Raw Office is a technology company that helps businesses save money, be carbon neutral, improve their environmental footprint, but most importantly, get control on their spend and get transparency on their spend. So you can think of us as, let's say, a Staples or an Office Depot, Office Max, but with a whole technology side of it that controls your costs, reports on your carbon emissions. Every time you buy something on our website, we calculate for every product and every shopping cart the carbon emission. We offset it down to 0. And then we also calculate the Made in America percentage, and we calculate the recycled percentage, and we have an environmental score for every customer. And then we provide all that data to the customers. So that's what we're doing. And we're helping businesses in both the financial and the environmental.
Awesome. Great. Thanks for everyone for sharing a little bit about yourself, and nice to see you're all in a little bit different fields or focus areas. So that's great. And so kind of starting off on our first question, and I think this can go a little bit deeper into what a lot of you have already shared, but we have from Yannick based in Seychelles. I'm not sure if I pronounced that country correctly, but his question is, what methodology and or tools do you use to assess a business carbon emissions, whether that's in-house or for your clients? And why don't you go first, Steve?
Sure. Well, in terms of methodology, I was glad glad to hear Angela mention the greenhouse gas protocol that she follows, because that's also what we primarily use for just about everything that we do with clients, and when we're working with them to help assess their greenhouse gas, or sorry, their carbon emissions. It's a great organization, and there's multiple kind of types of the greenhouse or focuses of the greenhouse gas protocol that have been developed. So if we're working with our municipal clients, we'll use their communities one. Corporate clients, there's a corporations version. And so there's multiple types of the greenhouse gas protocol that are available. But life cycle analysis are that's a tool that we have gotten so many inquiries about over the last couple of years. It's really, really growing, and that's by companies that are looking to make decisions about their energy profile or their supply chain and how they can reduce their emissions from their purchasing decisions, or also to make declarations on their own products. So that's another, because that looks at the entire life cycle from cradle to gate or cradle to grave, and it's a great way to analyze a carbon footprint. I'll stop there because I'm sure there's lots of other ideas as well in the panel.
Sure. Does anyone want to go next?
Yeah, I can follow that. I mentioned the greenhouse gas protocol, and we also use the life cycle accounting standard. And we too have been seeing a significant increase in inquiries around companies wanting to measure their life cycle impacts of their products. And so we've done that for companies like Pillacase. If anybody has seen the Pila phone, we've compared their phone case to conventional phone cases that are on the market. Tentree, a popular garment company, they also wanted to see how do their products compare to conventional non-organic products, or products not made with recyclable fibers or recycled fibers. And it allows us to look at those deep scope 3 emissions, which previously, following the greenhouse gas protocol, many businesses were reporting primarily on scope 1 and 2 and a little bit of scope 3, but scope 3 is where most businesses actually can really dive deep. The software that we use, when you ask about the tool, it's a web-based carbon software that we've developed based on the greenhouse gas protocol. It has a number of common scope 3 emissions built into it. However, when we're doing more full life cycle analysis, a lot of times we need to do either primary or secondary research to understand what the impacts are along a supply chain, because there's not standards necessarily internationally accepted, and they're not published the same way that a lot of the scope 1 and scope 2 emissions factors are published for different countries around the world.
Awesome. Jeff, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, so we had to create our own methodology, and mainly because nobody before us had calculated the carbon emissions or the environmental scores on supplies for businesses, right? Like, we've got over 90,000 products on our website in our catalog that we're selling. And, you know, our competitors are places like Amazon and Staples and Office Max and places like that. And they're not calculating, there isn't like anybody that's put all this together before. So what we did is we created what we call the raw score, and we scored 90,000 products for, the raw score is like our own environmental score that we created for every product. And that takes into account the carbon emissions, the country of manufacture, the percentage recycled content, whether or not there's third-party validated certifications on those products. And then there's some self-directed claims, which would be, I guess, not primary data, but, like self-proclaimed data. And we take all that into effect, and we give a score for every single product. And only about 10% of the products we scored get to have a 5-star rating. So we had to create our own methodology to do that. We created our own algorithm to do that. And then every time you buy something on the website, it tells you the score for full transparency. And then it calculates your score as a user, and it calculates your shopping cart. And it's a very interesting thing we've done. On the carbon side specifically, we teamed up with a carbon partner, and we calculated again, the carbon emissions for these 90,000 products. And then we report on that on every shopping cart. So it's been a large data project for us. Whereas, we're not an environmental consultant per se. So we're more of a, like, you could think of us as a B2B platform or a retail platform. And so we're using it in a different way than most people are. But it was a lot of work to get there, that's for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's great to hear that some of you have some commonality of your approaches, and then there's also differences, because I think it's obviously climate change. There's no like one fits all solution to different products and services. So great to hear kind of some of the differences. So for our next two questions, we want to kind of dive into the employees of a business. So we have two of our members from Pakistan. The first one is from Babar, and he was wondering, what training can businesses kind of offer to encourage employees to reduce their carbon footprint at work? So, either at work or even outside of work, is there a training that you specifically offer at your business, or do you have you seen training of other businesses that you think are really interesting or effective? And for this one, maybe Jeff, why don't you start with this one?
Well, yeah, it's interesting. This question, I think we have to think about is pre and post pandemic, because right now most people are staying at home, working at home, not commuting to work, and not eating out and making their own food. And so as employees, our carbon footprint is like at the lowest it's probably been in decades, right? Because we're not commuting, we're not eating out, we're not creating a lot of garbage because we're eating our own food, and like we're staying at home and stuff like that. So I think we sort of have to park pandemic and say, okay, what can you do outside of the pandemic? And there's a lot of things you can do. So I think the things that have the biggest impact are the food that we eat, our transportation, and the products we buy, right? So you got, where's the microphone? Sorry, I'm trying to get there. Okay, the food we eat, the transportation we choose, and the products we buy. And so in terms of the products we buy, you try to buy as much local as possible. You try to buy as much products that are, let's say, organic, or sustainable, or renewable, things like that. So, and in terms of how do we encourage the employees to do that stuff, I think it's about making it available, right? So if you choose an office that forces everybody to buy a car and drive and get there, well, that's going to have a different outcome than if you choose an office where they're right on public transportation, or they're in the neighborhoods where people can walk or bike to work. So I think there's a lot of choices that we can make to make it available and make it more friendly for the staff.
Great.
Yeah, I'm personally a trainee of Al Gore's Climate Reality Project. And I know the Climate Reality Project movement has been growing internationally, and they offer training in countries around the world. So I would encourage employers to promote that training to their employees. It's excellent training on really understanding not only the challenges around climate change and the science around climate change, but also to think about the solutions. And once you get trained, you can then be a volunteer presenter to present the Climate Reality Project presentation, which was based on Al Gore's documentary An Inconvenient Truth. So in the absence of that training, even just going and watching that documentary or the sequel to that documentary can provide, at least for me, it's there those things and those documentaries, or additional training on actual carbon footprint measurement that you can take through the Greenhouse Gas Management Institute for a fairly reasonable cost to understand the process and the protocols behind measuring carbon. All of those things often act as kind of a very motivating reminder to continue doing the work that I do, and to take those practices not only into my, into my business and into my work, but also into my home and into my family, and to talk about those things around the table with friends and family, as we're starting to be able to do a bit more in my part of Canada now.
Do you want to add to that, Steve?
Yeah, I'll just add, and it's hard because I know the question came from someone in Pakistan, and my perspective is very North American, but I think some of it will probably be transferable. But like, I know in Canada and the US, in every major community, there's at least one, if not more, what I would call sustainability networking groups, or business to business kind of sustainability engagement type of groups. In my area, it's called Sustainable Waterloo Region. In the Toronto area, it's called Partners in Project Green. And they're built, these organizations, they are built for kind of engaging the community and the business community in sustainability issues. They have workshops, either low cost or no cost workshops, seminars, kind of networking events, all these kinds of things that can be used to kind of make some of the challenging issues with sustainability and greenhouse gas management a lot more kind of understandable, stories that are told and such. So I think organizations should look out for those kinds of groups that are in their community and become involved with those. And I think having employees that are like their ambassadors at those organizations, that attend them, do the networking, bring that information back to their organization, that's a really important way. It's a effective and it's a cheap way to do training and employee engagement. And it should be done as part of their job, not in addition to their job. Like, employees shouldn't be said, go do this networking event at 7 p.m. and, it's just added on to what else you have to do. I mean, it should be considered, that should be considered part of their job role, if you ask me. So there's opportunities out there in most communities to learn and to take advantage of hearing what other experts or peers have done. Not really training, it's more about education, I would think, but along the same lines.
Yeah, it sounds like you all have kind of different approaches to this, which is interesting. And yeah, it's definitely, I would add to what Steve was saying. I think it's important to kind of make it part of their work, and not like an add-on that they have to do. So I like that for sure. And kind of going a little bit deeper, I know that Jeff touched on this in terms of commuting to work. And of course, during the pandemic, it's in a lot of industries where we can work from home. We had another question from Manan, also based in Pakistan, and to kind of give a perspective on what he was considering, he was saying, well, what if people don't have options, clean up to work, like buying an electric car, for example, whether that's in Pakistan or even in Canada, if they don't have maybe enough money to pay for that or don't have certain clean options. So what can businesses do to kind of support or incentivize your employees to kind of convert to eco-friendly options to commute to work, or maybe even we were talking about food options or any other ways that can kind of convert and help them convert to greener options? And I don't know if anyone wanted to Steve?
This is, in terms of incentivizing employees and such, that's something that I don't often, I'm not entirely overly experienced with that, in terms of the management of people and such, and how to encourage them. But all I can say is that internally at AET Group, we've got a very popular, we call it our sustainable transportation policy, and it's something where if someone is the company will reimburse up to 100% of a transit pass, up to I think it's $500 a year. They will reimburse $250, I think, dollars a year, or not every year, every few years for a new bicycle, or $1,500 for a electric vehicle or a hybrid vehicle. So I mean, these aren't, they may not be game changers, but in this, especially with electric vehicles, which can be pricey. But I mean, when you combine it with some other incentives that maybe you could get from the government or things like that, maybe it could help to make that decision a little bit easier to make that switch. And that's about all I can contribute, though, because it's not really an area that I'm overly active in.
That's
I think
fair.
those are great examples. We've worked with a company to help them develop a carbon reduction strategy, and one of the pieces of that was encouraging carpooling. Again, COVID doesn't necessarily allow for that, but as we get through this, encouraging carpooling, and there was a draw each month for those that showed up and confirmed that they had carpooled to work. For, it might sound counterintuitive, but they were at the time given a gas coupon to help support their carpooling, but they were reducing that, single occupant vehicle trip. And even if people aren't driving to work in their own vehicles, maybe it's sharing another form of transportation that is getting them to work. And now with COVID, showing that people can work from home, if that continues to be a possibility, offering those flexible work options where maybe you don't have to come into an office every day, and some days you can continue to work from home if you're working in an office environment or an environment that allows for that. And another way, maybe it's not for the commute, but even business travel, offering a standard, the same mileage fee, regardless of whether you're driving an EV or something that requires gas, can be an incentive for employees that are driving their own vehicle for business purposes and being reimbursed. So
I realized that I answered this question on the last question. I didn't answer the last question.
That's all right.
So maybe I'll just add a little bit to the training question that was before. And all the answers that the other panelists have given are great on both of those questions. For me, I don't have formal training. I went to business school and nobody taught me about environmental stuff at all. So the way that I got it, it was through organizations. It was through watching the documentaries. It was through reading. It was through going to conferences, talking to other people that had like-minded ideas. And that's how I learned all that stuff, was self-educating. And, today with the internet and with, like the movies that are available online and the conferences that you can go to and the webinars you can attend, like you can get a lot of education for free. You can attend a lot of different meetups or groups or conferences or events or networking opportunities like both the other panelists had shared here. There's a lot of things you can do to get yourself educated on these topics. And I have no formal education in it, but yet, I understand what's going on. I don't have the deep technical knowledge like some of the other folks here on this call or that you'll see that are teaching those courses, but I definitely understand the concepts on a high level, and I'm able to implement them into our businesses and into our projects that we're doing. So I think you can do the same and not have to spend a lot of time or money on it.
For sure. Yeah, again, great to see that there's different to kind of supporting your employees with training or with incentive programs or other ways to kind of help them in turn to become kind of carbon neutral, or even I don't always know all the terms. Sometimes it's like net negative, or I don't remember what is Like once you're carbon neutral, what is the next one? Like when you're there
Net
you go.
positive.
There you
Yeah,
go.
or depending on how you want to, yeah, net positive.
Awesome. Yeah, so kind of for our final question for tonight. So this comes from Brian based in the Philippines, and to give a little bit of a background, he helps startups in his for his work to kind of, I think he works in an incubator or an accelerator, and he was mentioning that a lot of the kind of startups and that he supports are in industries or fields that are carbon heavy, like manufacturing, AI, etc. So he was kind of wondering what tips do you give startups to kind of balance their business of their business while at the same time reducing their carbon footprint. Because as he was kind of saying, you know, as you scale, you're growing, and especially if you're manufacturing, you're more and more carbon. So how can you kind of make sure that you're balancing both of those at the same time? And does anyone want to go first?
Angela, you've got a hard stop, don't you? Do you want to go first?
I do, sure. Thank you. Thank
Sure.
you.
Okay.
Well, there's a great book out there called by a Canadian author named Bob Willard. Well, he's written several books, but one of them is called The New Sustainability Advantage. And there is a very strong business case for sustainability. And some of the key areas in what would traditionally be resource or energy intensive industries, one of the strongest ways of reducing costs is reducing the amount of energy and fuel that is necessary in order to build stuff or to transport us places. And I suppose if you're in prototype stage and you're manufacturing, it may be challenging at that point to procure or invest in more low carbon or energy efficient ways of operating. But certainly in the business planning and eventually scaling up, looking at how can we reduce the amount of stuff that we need to put into our processing, the amount of waste that's going to come out of it, that saves money as well. So being very efficient in waste, in energy, in water, and are all ways of reducing costs and also reducing footprints. If you're looking at, you know, where am I going to do this? Understanding what does the energy grid look like in that particular area? Is it fueled by coal? Is it fueled by renewable energy? Is there a transition to renewable energy? And even at that, you know, factory level, or if you're in an office, the building level, is there a place I can operate my business that has met some kind of green certification or energy efficient certification that will help to support the organization's larger carbon reduction and carbon management goals? And then one final point as well as scaling up is, you know, there's absolute carbon footprint, so the full carbon footprint of your organization, but then you can also look at the intensity metrics that are important to your organization. So things like number of widgets produced or number of goods sold or number of employees or number of square feet. And as a company scales, ideally, while your absolute footprint may go up over time, eventually we all need to work towards reducing that absolute footprint. And a good indication of that is that your intensity-based carbon footprint is going down as you scale up. So you're becoming more efficient as you grow. And I do have to leave because it's 4:30, but thanks very much for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much for sharing your insights, Angela. I appreciate it. All right. Yeah, thanks again. And who would like to go next? Steve or Jeff?
I'll go. Steve, you can have the last word.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things you can think of here. The first one would be packaging and shipping transportation. Like those are things that are controllable. You know, the actual raw material might not be as controllable, but the packaging is something you control. So you can look at reduction and efficiency in your packaging. You can also look at the shipping. So I believe that, you know, local production and local distribution is best. And that's why we track that and we score that for every shopping cart that we have is trying to do local goods for your local community. If you're shipping things all over the world, that's going to increase the carbon footprint. Now, if you are shipping it all over the world, are you doing that on airplane or are you doing that on boat? huge difference in your carbon emissions footprint if you're overnighting something on a DHL across the world versus you put it on a boat with 100,000 other products, and it's taking a slow boat across the world. I think the other thing to think about too is whether or not you could be looking at offsets so that you can reduce the carbon emissions net by offsetting it down to zero or even to a net positive, like we were talking about before. And I think, like as Angela said, there is a business case that can be made for being eco-friendly. In fact, somebody shared a study with me that was done on the stock exchange, and the companies that have environmental, like the companies are green companies or environmental companies or social responsibility companies, those companies outperform the Dow Jones Industrial Average, the S&P 500, like they outperform the market, the companies that are socially responsible and eco-friendly. So there's a business ROI case to be made for making those kind of decisions. Even though in some cases it might cost you a little bit extra money to do those things, there's a business ROI to do that. As an example, organic food charges more at the grocery store than non-organic food, and they're getting paid more money to do that. And there's lots of consumers that will pay that extra to have clean food. So there is a business case that can be made in many of these cases.
With what the other folks said, there's not actually that much. I would reiterate every single thing they said. But I mean, I understand why the question came up, because there seems to be this this mentality that growth and and footprint reduction move in opposite directions, and they can, like the other panelists have said, they can very much be done concurrently and move in the same direction. So it's and I would say that for a company, it does, to me, it's whether it's a startup or whether it's an established company. If you're in real heavy duty growth mode, it can be a challenge to identify sometimes green carbon reduction opportunities in those Scope 1 and Scope 2 greenhouse gas sources that tend to occur within your own walls. But it's not impossible, but it can be challenging. But I would say for companies that really want to look at ways that they can reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, often the Scope 1 and Scope 2 are the minority of their emissions anyways. And if you do a comprehensive look at Scope 3, which is all those other emissions that you influence throughout the value chain, that's where your real big carbon footprint, true carbon footprint is. And that's where there's some real big reduction opportunities that even companies in growth mode can tackle. Jeff mentioned the packaging. He mentioned supplier selection, logistics. These are all Scope 3 sources that can be looked at. Angela mentioned waste. I'll throw business travel in there as well. And these are all sources of Scope 3 carbon emissions that are very much actionable, even when you're in a big growth strategy. So it's certainly not impossible at all to have an impressive carbon reduction while you're still growing.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely, I think what Brian was kind of wondering is especially like in terms of the planning at the very start, right, of how to do that. And you've all kind of touched on kind of how to consider every part of your business, whether it's manufacturing or the waste or travel, etc. So I think it's important to take and see where you can reduce at the start and how you can plan that all out. And speaking of which, you are all either have founded or working for a B Corp, which, as some of you viewers may or may not know, is essentially a certification for kind of companies to be social impact and sustainable. And I think you both probably know all the criteria, but a lot of them are on kind of environmental and sustainability issues to become certified. With that in mind too, next week, actually, the B Corp is having their Global Climate Summit, and it's open to all. So if any of the viewers and of course the panelists might be joining, want to join, I think I'll share a link to that. So it's from June 29th to July 1st. So if you want to learn more, and this one is global, kind of B Corps from around the world, so will be exciting viewers who are also in many countries. And with that, I want to thank all the panelists. We will, in the description of this video or this webinar, you'll see their LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with them if you want to have any follow-up questions directly to them. And again, thanks so much, Angela, Jeff, and Steve, for sharing all your valuable insights. I appreciate it.
Thanks for the invitation, Mario.
All right.